So today we are diving deep into something pretty significant. It's the Australian Senate inquiry into ASIC. That's the Australian Securities and Investment Commission.
Right.
Our mission here is to really take this mountain of written submissions and just pull out the core of what everyone was saying. You know, the victims, the industry, the regulator itself.
And you can see the tension, right from the jump. The numbers alone tell a story of, of fear and distrust.
Okay.
We looked at the total 198 submissions that the committee received, and the way they split up is, frankly, alarming.
So give us the breakdown. What's the story hidden in those statistics?
Okay, so out of almost 200 documents, the vast majority, 134 of them, were either totally confidential or filed with the name withheld.
134.
Yep. So you have 45 submissions from what you'd call industry, so banks, law firms,
Right.
ASIC itself, then only 16 that are identifiable as consumer submissions.
16. That's it.
That's it. But then you get the really shocking figures. 78 submissions were filed as name withheld, mostly individual consumer complaints.
Okay.
And a massive 56 are just listed as confidential. That means no text, no author, nothing for the public to see.
So the headline here is really anonymity.
Yeah.
2/3 of the feedback given to this official inquiry is hidden.
Exactly.
And that really forces the big question, doesn't it? Why are so many Australians, people who are often victims of serious financial crime, unable to put their name to their own story?
And what's the deal with those 56 confidential files? Who do they actually protect?
Right.
The fact that so many people felt they couldn't engage openly, it signals this profound reluctance, maybe even an outright fear of what might happen if they do.
And this gets illustrated in a really stark way with the trio capital fraud victims. This wasn't just them choosing to be anonymous, was it? Their voices were actively, shut down.
That's right. It's a perfect example. Victims of the trio capital fraud, they tried to file 36 separate individual submissions.
36 people trying to tell their story.
And the committee rejected every single one.
So what happened? They were told to just group up.
Exactly. Consolidate. The committee said they would accept one 20-page document from the group VOFF Victims of Financial Crime, which was supposed to represent all 36 of them.
And this is where the story takes a really illustrative turn about how victims experience the system.
It really does. Because VOFF, they did the work, they compiled this single submission, but according to the sources, that document, it was never published. It wasn't even formally acknowledged by the committee.
Wait, so it just vanished?
It vanished from the public record. You have people who've been financially ruined, they're stopped from telling their own story, they're forced to consolidate their trauma, and then the result is just, poof, gone.
That raises huge questions about transparency, about just the basic dignity of acknowledging what these people went through.
It absolutely does. It paints a picture where the process itself, whether it was on purpose or not, seems designed to minimize how many individual complaints you can actually see.
Let's turn to the voices that we could hear. Those 16 consumer submissions that were published. It's a tiny fraction, but they seem to paint a pretty consistent picture.
Oh, devastatingly consistent. The consensus is simple. A total lack of action from ASIC, profound regulatory negligence, and just a feeling of being completely abandoned. The language isn't subtle at all. It's an indictment.
And some of the claims are just. They're so memorable. You have Donald Carter, who literally introduces himself as an aggrieved victim of lack of action by ASIC.
That's the core of it right there. And James Asher, he went even further. He flatly stated that ASIC was grossly negligent.
Grossly negligent.
Yeah. He said it failed him as an investor by, completely failing its duty as a regulator. This isn't just about a few mistakes.
No, it's a failure of its entire purpose.
Right. And then you get Christopher Budd, who asserted that ASIC failed at every point to detect, disrupt, or enforce any provision of the Corporations Act.
At every point, when you see that level of accusation, it suggests these victims feel the regulator is just completely defunct, doesn't it?
Defunct in terms of protecting them, absolutely. And it's not just about, small-time fraud. Lindsay David alleged that ASIC does appear to never properly investigate serious allegations of mortgage fraud by lenders.
So a failure to police the biggest players in the market.
Precisely. And that critique of systemic weakness, that's where the group bank reform now comes in. They argued the laws just seem to favor white-collar criminals.
And they called for corporate watchdogs with teeth. A direct challenge to the regulator's power.
It is. And this all leads to a A more philosophical problem that some submissions pointed out, Carolyn Reed argued that ASIC's poor performance is deeply connected to this government policy of caveat emptor.
Caveat emptor. So buyer beware.
Exactly. Buyer beware.
That almost sounds like a deliberate policy choice, one designed to keep the regulator weak.
That's her argument, that this policy is what keeps ASIC weak and ineffective and having no regard for consumer protection.
Because if the whole philosophy is that it's up to you to protect yourself, then of course the regulator isn't going to step in aggressively.
Precisely. It shifts the blame from, say, bureaucratic failure to a deliberate political stance.
And that philosophical divide is the perfect pivot point. Because on the other side, you have the industry, the ones who benefit from buyer beware. You have the heartbreaking consumer stories.
Yeah.
And then you have these glossy submissions from the banks and law firms.
It is a complete contrast. I mean, the industry submissions, they don't see systemic failure. They don't see widespread negligence from ASIC. For them, the system is fundamentally sound.
So what's their solution when people do lose money?
They point to the existing institutions, specifically the compensation scheme of last resort, the CSLR, and the Australian Financial Complaints Authority, or AFCA.
ASCA.
Yes, they say these are the right ways to handle it, that the recourse structure is there and it's robust.
But that's the counter-narrative, isn't it? The victim's experience with AFCA and the CSLR is, well, the complete opposite.
It's the core of the problem. Victims argue that AFCA is basically protecting the industry. So many people said they submitted complaints only to find AFCA just was not interested in justice.
So they see it as a shield for the financial sector, not an umpire.
Exactly. And that feeling of institutional betrayal, especially after you feel you've already been failed by ASIC, must be just immense.
And it extends to the CSLR as well, the compensation scheme of last resort.
Absolutely. Despite the name, it's apparently filled with many troubling controversies. Victims allege that it also seems to be pleasing the upper end of town and just fails to provide any real justice.
So the very bodies the industry holds up as proof the system works
Are the same bodies victims see as part of the problem, as actively protecting the power structure.
That gap in trust seems to be the single most important finding here. We're not just talking about losing money anymore.
No, we're talking about a complete collapse of faith in the process, in any of the institutions.
And that disillusionment is so strong, it's actually spilling out into public protest, isn't it? The source material points to specific social media groups popping up.
Yeah, groups like AFCA Senate Inquiry MNOW, Australian Financial Complaints Authority, AFCA Exposed, and Bank RIP OFFs.
That's a huge shift.
It's incredibly telling. When you go from filing a formal private submission to organizing a public resistance movement online, it means you feel there are no legitimate avenues left for you. You're seeking justice outside the system that was built to provide it.
This deep dive has really just laid bare how fractured this whole environment is.
Yeah.
So let's try to synthesize this for everyone listening. What's the essential takeaway from this tale of 198 submissions?
I think the key takeaway is the systemic alignment around caveat emptor. You have this profound structural conflict. On one side, victims see regulatory failure from ASIC and compensation bodies that are captured by industry. And on the other, you have the industry players who argue that everything is fine and the mechanisms for recourse work. At the end of the day, until that foundational assumption of buyer beware changes, the consumer experience of ASIC is probably going to stay the same.
An experience of dismissal, fear, and a complete lack of trust.
Exactly.
And that really leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to consider. If the process for holding a financial watchdog accountable makes 134 Australians feel like they have to stay anonymous, and if the few who do band together are just publicly ignored, what does that actually imply about the integrity of the whole process? Is accountability even possible when the people most affected feel the most vulnerable?
A vital question. Thanks for joining us for this crucial deep dive.
We'll catch you next time for more essential insights.